Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Kirsty Rupert, and I work for San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. I'm an associate director in our community engagement group as part of our conservation science and wildlife health team. I'm so excited to learn from today's presentation, along with the many other great events and talks that are part of this year's Sea Otter Awareness Week. Today, we're hearing from Gena Bentall, Director of Sea Otter Savvy. She'll be sharing with us about coexistence and what that means for recovering sea otter populations. Coexistence with wildlife is a central theme to so many conservation efforts, including those that San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance is committed to, which is in part why we're so honored to host this webinar and hear from Gena. We'll have time for questions and discussions at the end, so you can use the chat feature to share those, and we'll circle to those in a bit after hearing from Gena. First, I'd like to share a little bit about San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. So one moment, please. Gena, thumbs up? Nope, that's okay. So let's see. How about now? Great. Okay. San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance is an international nonprofit with two front doors, the San Diego Zoo and the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. We also contribute to conservation efforts around the world, organized in these 8 eco-regional hubs where strategies are focused on protecting key species, ecosystems, partnering with communities, government agencies, and other conservation organizations. One of these areas is aptly named the Oceans Hub, where some efforts target and focus kelp forest ecosystems, which we've heard throughout the week that sea otters are a play a critical role in maintaining. So through these efforts, we are trying to build partnerships with conservation organizations committed to sea otter conservation. And one of those valued partners is Sea Otter Savvy, which is why we're so excited to host you today. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Gena to share a bit about coexistence in sea otters. Let me stop sharing. It looks good, Gena.
There we go. Thank you so much, Kirsty, for the introduction, and thank you to the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance for inviting me to speak today. And thanks to all of you for joining me here today on the day 4 of Sea Otter Awareness Week. I am the director of Sea Otter Savvy, a nonprofit organization with a mission to use outreach and education to foster community stewardship and reduce human-caused disturbance to sea otters. We are working for the most part to resolve conflict over space between sea otters and people. And I have grown with Sea Otter Savvy over the last 9, almost 10 years. I've learned a lot. I still don't know the answer to resolving this conflict, but I'm imparting some of what I have learned over the last years as an example, a case study, if you will, of a struggle to preserve wildness in a world with expanding human dominance. It's a central question. What kind of neighbors will we be to other species? And that remains unanswered. Before I get started, a couple of reminders. Like I said, this is day 4 of Sea Otter Awareness Week, which occurs every year during the last full week of September. This year marks the 22nd year, and the theme is Together We Thrive, very appropriate for the material I'm about to share. It highlights the interconnectedness of humans, sea otters, and the environment. It encourages communities, organizations, and individuals to work together for a healthier, more sustainable future. This week also highlights Sea Otter Savvy's We Were Here Sea Otter program, which educates communities and stakeholders who are missing sea otters and offers a survey for community involvement. The Southern Sea Otter Range is currently from Gaviota State Park in the south to Año Nuevo State Park in the north. Sea otters did once inhabit all along the Pacific coast. They're ecologically and culturally significant, and there is an increasing discussion regarding possible reintroduction to historical habitats. So to move forward, government agencies and sea otter research community needs to engage communities and stakeholders and to hear their perspectives. So if you're wondering what you can do, please take the Sea Otter survey. I'll share one more link with a QR code, one more slide at the end of this talk. Your voice matters. If you're wondering if you are a stakeholder in the recovery of sea otters, you are, no matter where you are. And we'll bring this up one more time before I finish my talk. All right, let's start with the definition. Urban wildlife. Urban wildlife is a term that has been coined to describe wildlife that has adapted their lifestyle to living in the concrete jungles of cities and suburban neighborhoods. And I would update that to include the urbanized marine environments all along the California coast and along other coasts within the historical Sea Otter range. So there are harbors, lots of development along the coastline, especially in California, and I would define those as urban areas. So let's hope we never live to see the extreme habituation illustrated by this comic strip. The deer says, "I don't like to gossip, Vicky, but the raccoons were in your garage." And have you seen what the bears have done with their den? Tacky. Anywho, gotta go pick up the kids from soccer practice. And she said, thinks wildlife are getting way too urbanized. When we hear the term urban wildlife, what species comes to mind? So we think of coyotes like this guy, raccoons, skunks, opossums, but sea otters as urban wildlife, these symbols of the wild, rugged, inaccessible coasts of Big Sur, Alaska, British Columbia, where this particular photo was taken. But for a considerable portion of their current California range, the southern sea otter largely overlaps with human development, dense populations, and high rates of tourism. They are literally surrounded with boats, recreation craft, commercial craft, buildings, agriculture, golf courses, highways, triathlons, regattas, drones, photographers. The list goes on. What does coexistence mean? The difference between humans and all other life on this planet is that we can actually choose how to coexist in the world. We can choose what that word means with regards to the other beings in this world. Historically, coexistence between people and wildlife has meant one thing: move wildlife out of the way. Sea otters are certainly forced to adapt to us. Their survival depends on it. Will we in turn adapt to them? Will we give a little of all that we have in a way that respects their needs as they resume their place on the North American coast? So a little bit about me. How did I arrive here? I've spent over 20 years working as a sea otter biologist, studying sea otters for US Geological Survey, UC Santa Cruz, and Monterey Bay Aquarium. I spent thousands of hours watching sea otters in places like San Nicolas Island in Southern California, where I did my graduate research, to the more exotic and extremely remote Russian Commander Islands, to right here on the Central Coast, where I'm speaking to you from today, where tracking is a little bit less rugged and there's always an espresso less than 5 minutes away from wherever I'm tracking sea otters. All this time spent studying sea otters has resulted in a couple of things relevant for my work today here with Sea Otter Savvy. It's left me with what I would feel comfortable saying is a fair amount of savvy about sea otters. And it has left me pretty frustrated by how relentlessly they are disturbed by our recreation activities. While I tracked sea otters, I inevitably encountered disturbance. I would be filled with dread, approaching certain sites, knowing I would likely witness disturbance to a mom and a small pup or a female I knew was recovering from just rearing and weaning one. It was difficult to witness and difficult to combat. And I confess, I did a lot of yelling in those days, a technique that we have definitely abandoned from the very start of Sea Otter Savvy. But I understand the frustration in a world where it can sometimes be a struggle to feel like you have any power to make a difference. Maybe there's not much we can do to keep white sharks from biting sea otters. That's the #1 cause of death for sea otters in California, by the way. But the simple act of giving sea otters space is one thing we can do to make the world a better, safer, and more peaceful space. So here are some components of the case study, characteristics of sea otters and some elements of how humans perceive them that are part of the coexistence equation. So sea otters are a recovering species. They're vulnerable and they live near shore. And humans, from a human perspective, they are very accessible, they are charismatic, they're profitable, and they are a competitor. Wherever they're recovering, sea otters are perceived as competitors for both food and space. But keep in mind, when it comes to food, one is competing to meet their survival demands, and the other is competing primarily for their livelihood. Since Sea Otter Savvy focuses mainly on conflict over space, primarily in urbanized California, that's really what I'm going to emphasize today. The solutions to conflict over food employ some overlapping principles, but are much more complex. Conflict over food tends to center around a specialized user group, shell fisheries, and conflict over space can pertain to anyone living at or visiting anywhere within the current or future recovery range in the North Pacific coast. Sea otters once ranged continuously throughout the entire North Pacific Rim, from northern Japan through the Russian Far East, Alaska, Canada, and down the US West Coast into Baja. They were reduced from hundreds of thousands to just 2,000 or so in these scattered remnant colonies that are shown here in these red circles by the maritime fur trade, all within the short time period between 1741 and 1911, when they received protection under the North American Fur Treaty. Less than 200 years. Today, they have recovered at varying rates portions of their historical range. And notice there is still a large gap isolating southern sea otters down here in Hydrolutrus nereus in California from the other subspecies, northern up here in Alaska, Canada, Washington State, all the way through the Aleutians, over to the Asian subspecies in Russia and northern Japan. By the time the Marine Mammal Protection Act was enacted in 1972, the California population had grown from as few as 50 to more than 1,000 individuals, an average annual growth rate of about 5%, and had recolonized more than 200 miles of the California coast. Today, its range is principally along the central California coast from Pigeon Point, Año Nuevo, as I mentioned earlier, just north of Santa Cruz, south to just around this elbow of California, Point Conception, to Gaviota State Park, and also San Nicolas Island, which is the most remote of Southern California's Channel Islands. And so that total number has been hovering around 3,000, with stalled expansion to the very north and south, which is a topic that I'm not going to have much time to cover today. Here on the left is a heat map with the reddest areas indicating the highest densities of sea otters. Range center, where densities are highest, is typically considered to be between Moss Landing and Morro Bay. And if we carry this range map over, we can see that the southern sea otter is recovered really only a small portion of its pre-fur trade California range, all expanding from this origin point off the coast of Big Sur. In the huge state of California, I'm able to drive from one end of their range to the other in just a handful of hours. In fact, I almost did it today. And here you guys are down in San Diego County, or many of you are in San Diego County. You had a visitor earlier this summer that hung out off the coast of La Jolla. We can talk a little bit more about this guy in Q&A, but this is our volunteer at large, Cami, who kept track of this guy for us during the short time that he was hanging out down there. We can talk about the importance of these, what we call bold explorers, to sea otter recovery. So sea otters may someday repopulate the Southern California coast, and I really hope to see that in my lifetime. Southern sea otters were listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, primarily due to reduced range and population size, vulnerability to oil spills, and oil spill risk from coastal tanker traffic. As a consequence of their threatened status, southern sea otters are also recognized as depleted under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Under state law, southern sea otters are fully protected mammals. In their 2015 5-year report for the southern sea otter, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service identified human-caused disturbance as an additional threat to their recovery. Why are sea otters particularly vulnerable? Sea otters among marine mammals are exceptionally at risk for the effects of disturbance. Why? There's a term used in animal physiology which describes species as capital spenders versus savers. In the two photos shown here, we got the elephant seal on top with her pup and a sea otter on the bottom. Can you guess which is the spender and which is the saver? Think about that. How are they saving? And what are they spending? What is the currency that they're using? Remember the range center I indicated on the map a few slides ago? It's not unusual to see very thin sea otters, just like the one pictured here, at the center of the California range. And I will actually circle back to this particular sea otter, individual sea otter later. Next time you're out otter spotting, keep an eye out for visible spine and pelvis when they dive. And that's just an indicator of how food limited, what a high premium food and prey have at the place where they're living. There is only one way energy comes in, and that is the form of prey for which they must expend energy foraging. Below are the activities that are necessary for survival: grooming, pup care, swimming between foraging areas and resting areas, things they have to do every single day. If you add on top of that, the avoidance of disturbance, usually swimming and diving, the most energetically expensive behaviors of sea otters, the luxury tax of the sea otter's income, it hurts and it is unnecessary. It's like when you're just making ends meet, paycheck to paycheck, and your car breaks down, requiring funds that you've not been able to save up for. That is what accumulating disturbance by human activities costs sea otters. There are characteristics of sea otters that place them in proximity to humans. So near shore, shallow divers favor habitats where humans live, work, forage, play. They're proximate to human development. They are accessible. There are a number of places throughout the southern sea otter's current range where important sea otter habitat and favored marine recreational opportunities overlap. Interactions between sea otters and humans are inevitable, and those are really the places along the Central Coast where Sea Otter Savvy puts in most effort and work. Their accessibility is compounded by what I refer to as the sea otter's publicity problem. These animals are undeniably charismatic in their appearance and behavior. Dare I say the word cute? While they certainly have their detractors, those numbers are vastly overwhelmed by their fans, and travelers to the Central Coast are often specifically seeking interactions or images to replicate what they've seen on social media or on the media at large. They definitely draw people in closer, and that doesn't help. They're also profitable. They draw business and revenue to the communities where they live. There is a flip side to everything, though, and we're currently investigating the impact of increased numbers of recreational users in bounded habitat like Elkhorn Slough, which is right at the heart of Monterey Bay and connects the terrestrial freshwater with the Monterey Bay saltwater habitat. It's important sea otter habitat and many, many other species as well. Numbers of outdoor areas spiked as people returned to outdoor activities during the COVID-19 outbreak, and Elkhorn Slough was no exception. This is a study that we have in progress, so we're going to be looking at the impact of increases in user numbers on sea otter disturbance rates. So this is just a time-lapse video that shows the difference between the time during the peak lockdown when we had no one out or very few out, and Labor Day following the issuance of the recommendations from the CDC that people should engage in outdoor activities and do so safely. So there's a lot going on there. Elkhorn Slough is really a place where we're really piloting this Together We Thrive concept, and the community is really coming together there. All of these recreational businesses, many of which you saw represented in that time-lapse video, are participating in trying to make sure that sea otters are protected and remain healthy and safe. And people still are able to come out and enjoy that beautiful place. So we have charisma, accessibility, profitability, add in social media and the selfie culture, which I'm not even talking about today, and that equals disturbance. So we start with sea otters as a recovering species, already at risk, charismatic. As we've mentioned, they have this publicity problem and that people want to get close to them. They are accessible. They live near shore. They're not deep divers, so they have to live within a certain dive limit, a certain distance to shore, and actually prefer some protected waters where people like to recreate. They're extra vulnerable because of their unique characteristics as a marine mammal and their inability to store energy in the way other marine mammals are able to do. And then human behavior being just really difficult to change. And people tend to do what they want to do, and my job becomes changing what it is they want to do, and that is really, really hard. So let's look towards the future and some solutions. Again, let's come back to this definition. What does coexistence mean? Remind ourselves of our luxury of choice. The difference between humans and all the other life on this planet is we can choose how to coexist. And animals have always had to adapt to us. Maybe it's time we make an effort to give a little room to them. Awareness is a first, but not the only step toward coexistence. And what better time to celebrate this than during Sea Otter Awareness Week? Awareness can include a lot of things. Awareness of the vulnerability of sea otters that we just talked about, their natural history, their history as a recovering species. Awareness that human disturbance is a thing. What does it look like? What costs does it have to sea otters? What can you do to prevent it? Awareness of one's own environmental identity. Where do you fit into this environment? What is your connection to it? And we believe awareness is so important. We have a whole week dedicated to it, and you're right in the middle of it right now. So take advantage of all of the awareness that you can soak up in all over the course of this week. Awareness from a foundation of science is very important to us. We require that our tool for bringing awareness, outreach, be founded in science. So we're not only keeping up with the most up-to-date research from others, but we conduct our own research to better understand disturbance and to track trends. Our data collection sessions or scan sessions are conducted by volunteers, students, and interns of the Sea Otter Savvy program at sites throughout the Central Coast. So we're bringing community members into our research and involving them in that as well. We began collecting data in 2015, and so we have nearly a 10-year data set. And our scan sessions are done throughout the year, all seasons, throughout the week, and we try to cover all of the daylight hours in which people might actually be out on the water among sea otters. And this is just one simple figure that is sort of the foundation of the rest of the work we do and the conclusions that we draw from this long-term research. And each one of these colored lines with the colored space around it represents the effect of the proximity of someone, like a single kayaker in this case, as they get closer to a sea otter. And this is totally intuitive, right? It makes sense. On the y-axis, the relative effect on activity state is the probability that a sea otter will be disturbed. And the x-axis is the stimuli or kayak's distance from the otter in meters. Let's see if I have this animated. Yeah. Due to our impressive data set that includes multiple sites, we're able to break this down by location as well as show the average across sites. which is here in, which is the line here. Actually, I was going to say it was in black, and now I'm not seeing it in black. We actually don't have the average on this particular graph, but you can kind of figure out where it is. I think it might actually be that bluish line right in the very middle. So that's the average across all of our sites. And then we use, as the COG gets closer and closer, we can see that the potential for disturbance increases exponentially. Behavior, you're likely to see an alert and then a distinguished activity change. And we can isolate this inflection point, which is what I've shown with this little box with the dotted lines. And that helps show us where the thresholds are to help generate graphics for outreach purposes. Oh, sorry about that one. For example, our distance results, from our distance results, we're able to create infographics like this that are distributed to businesses and partners as a tool to help increase awareness and assist marine recreation businesses in customer orientation. And especially when this is paired with a verbal orientation, graphics like this can convey information to those who may have been previously unaware of their potential impact. And the hope is it will result in better change for behavior change for those who are recreating. So this is just one of our tools that we can generate from the research that we've conducted. I think it's time to adapt our definition of what a community, who comprises a community. With empathy comes respect. As a society, we generally respect our neighbors and we see them as part of our community, but who do we define as our neighbors? And if they are part of the ecosystem that we live in, aren't they our neighbors and part of our community as well? Merriam-Webster defines a community as a unified body of individuals, and it doesn't specify species. So take a moment and consider, what are some of the ways we're unified with sea otters? Sea otters are part of our communities, and they may be part of yours in Southern California someday. And they're working hard to make a living along the California Central Coast. Under that umbrella, they are deserving of our care, consideration, and stewardship as one of our neighbors. And I will tell you, kids are really good at recognizing this. And when I ask them to define who their neighbors are, they often include non-human species in that definition. Valuation, in case we have to assign them a valuation, which is sometimes necessary to get people really excited about conservation. How do we value sea otters? How do you place a value? Monetary, cultural, ecological, there's many different ways. But sea otters are keystone species, meaning that they have a big impact on their surrounding ecological community, disproportionate to their biomass, their body size, how many sea otters there are. And this term comes from architecture. It's the center stone here in red that's putting pressure. All the outer stones are pressing on that red keystone. And if you pull that keystone out, what happens? The arch collapses. It is integral to the maintaining that structure of that architectural piece to have that keystone in place. And when it's missing, it can cause disaster, whether you're talking about an architecture structure or ecological one. This is a really great video that I'll recommend on YouTube called "Some Animals Are More Equal to Others," that does a really great job of defining what keystone species are and the origin of that concept. Community stewardship. There are so many businesses that live alongside sea otters in Central California. So Sea Otter Savvy has a certification process for businesses with our Community Active Wildlife Stewards program. And maybe we can pop that into the link to that in the chat box so you can see some of the businesses along the Central Coast that have really gone through a pretty rigorous certification process, and we now recognize them for how they apply stewardship in their business model. And it is applying marketing principles to create value in order to influence target audience behaviors that benefit the community as a whole, including wildlife and businesses. What can you do? You can learn, educate yourself, and share with others. And you're here today, so you've taken that step already. Expand your empathy. With empathy, and remember, with empathy comes respect. Expand your definition of community. Share with others and seek others out that you can share your passion for your community with. Find your passion, find your one thing, and devote yourself to that. To borrow from Gandhi here, be the change you want to see in the world. Share your voice, change your behavior, be active, and support by contributing money, needed supplies, or time to organizations working on causes that resonate with your environmental identity. And you can, I'm going to bring up the survey again in just a minute. You can share your voice that can help us to better understand the stakeholders' perspective on recovery of sea otters in California and Oregon. A little bit about Sea Otter Savvy. Want to emphasize this all started not long ago out of passion from a community in spring of 2014. A working group composed of members from California's Southern Sea Otter Research Alliance was formed to address specifically the issue of marine recreation and sea otter disturbance. Sea Otter Savvy is a product of this working group, most of whom continue to serve as program advisors. And it was really conceived as a way to incorporate outreach techniques with a system of good stewardship recognition as a way to recruit the community as active participants in creating a new social norm of responsible behavior around wildlife. So just to read our mission statement, it's to foster awareness and stewardship in Central California coastal communities, and hopefully someday that will extend to Southern California and Northern California communities and the wildlife viewing public, to reduce human sea otter conflict and disturbance and increase an ethic of coexistence. We are a 501 nonprofit organization, and these are some of our supporters. These logos listed at the bottom are funding supporters. Finally, I'd like to share a story of an individual, Blanca's story, which is highlighted in our social media post today. If you follow us on socials, she was the skinny otter that I used as an example of life on the edge survival earlier, the comparison with the elephant seal. Born in 2007, Blanca, and you can sometimes see her white flipper tag pop up in this video, had 13 pups, not all of which survived. She liked to eat crabs. She was not a super great mom. Some otters are super great, but compared to a lot of the others that we knew from their tagged history, she was not really great, but she did as well as she could. And she just died in 2024. This is her with her 11th pup. This was back in 2020. Her mom was also tagged, estimated to be born in 1993. She also liked crabs, not surprising that she passed that on to her daughter. And Blanca was her last pup. She died only 6 days after she successfully weaned Blanca. I had the privilege to spend time getting to know many individual sea otters like Blanca and her mom. Their stories are what I think of when I come to work every day. They are my teachers and they're my inspiration. And I had the privilege of meeting another exceptional individual just last week, and she closed her inspiring talk reminding us to acknowledge the individuality of animals. As humans, we are frequently guilty of lumping these individuals together as a species. For the good of the species is not a meritless goal, but we must not forget that a species is made up of individuals that are capable of having personalities, friendships, struggles, emotions, a home. And it's those individual sea otters who are deserving of respect and an opportunity to thrive. And here's just a few links if you want to learn more about our organization. We're all over social media. So just if you search for @SeaOtterSavvy, you're definitely going to find us. Check out seaottersavvy.org. There's lots of information if you want to take a deep dive into all of this. And then finally, if you want to share your voice as a stakeholder in sea otter recovery, please take this survey. It's a really important tool and your voice matters. And also we're we still have lots more happening during Sea Otter Awareness Week. So please tune in tomorrow for the Defenders of Wildlife presentation at noon, and at the Noyo Center presentation on Friday also at noon. And I think there's going to be more links in the chat for upcoming stuff for Sea Otter Awareness Week. And that's all I got.
Wow, I know I'm the only one clapping on screen, but I cannot be alone because that was fascinating, Gena. Thank you so much for sharing. I know that there are some questions coming into the chat. I have a few to kick us off with because I cannot help but start with the bold explorer you mentioned, spotted off the San Diego coast earlier this year. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about that situation and speaking on what that means for range expansion for the Southern Sea Otter in California?
Yeah, so I love this term bold explorer. I may have coined that term, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to take credit if it's not due. So males, and this applies probably across multiple species, tend to be a little more risk averse. Risk prone. And with females being more risk averse and having maybe a little bit more to lose by making these long-term kind of unpredictable movements. And so males are often the first to kind of travel outside of what we define as the range boundaries of sea otter populations. And so it's not uncommon to have males kind of show up in places like that. I mean, San Diego's pretty far, but not outside of their ability to swim. And the thing is, they're not likely to stay for very long. And so when we hear about these encounter or these sightings, it's a pretty high likelihood that they're just not going to stick around for more than a week or so. And that turned out to be the case for this guy. I was really bummed. We have a volunteer team member that just happened to be down in San Diego. That was Cami that I showed you. And I had them go out and look for him. And I was really hoping he would stay around. But he moved on. We can't say where he went. He may have gone all the way down. There's some otters down on one of the offshore islands off Baja. So he headed all the way down there. He may have gone out to San Nicolas. We can't say for sure. These guys are important to range expansion because they're sort of exploring new territory, but we need a few males to settle and then for females to come in and start settling there and rearing their pups. And that's a pretty big step. And that requires them to feel safe and comfortable doing that. So that's really the tricky part. And that seems to be where we've kind of stalled out with range expansion in California at this point. So these sightings are really cool to see. We had one a couple of years back off Laguna Beach and then just disappeared. Maybe it's the same guy, who knows? And it's always great to see. And I just want to add a note of caution because of all that I've talked about previously. The less these guys are disturbed when they show up, the more likely they are to stay. And so people get super excited about them. And in this case, I think people were being pretty respectful and just watching from shore and using binoculars and scopes and things like that. But we just want to be very careful. I'm often kind of hesitant to even talk about a sighting or make it public because I'm worried about them getting surrounded by boats and kayaks and things, drones and all that kind of stuff. So just keep that in mind when these guys show up. The more peace we give them, the longer they're going to stay.
More likely they are to stay. I'm glad you noted that. I was going to follow up and ask if Cami had also observed any interactions because the La Jolla area, it's a coastal recreation area. It's gorgeous, and there are also kayaking operations there. Just curious if that was part of the observations and recordings as well.
Cami did not observe any interactions like that. They were actually doing some work for the children's pool pinniped observations. So it was at that same spot. I don't know what it is with that spot and marine mammals, but maybe they need to find another spot. But Cami did direct me to local shops, and I did send them some messages. By the time I'd even had time to do that, the otter had moved on, but she did not observe anything. I kind of think that it got out, but it didn't get out really in a viral way. So I think locals were pretty good. If anybody saw anything, I'd love to hear about it, but I we didn't observe anything.
That is really encouraging to hear. You noted how difficult it is to influence human behavior and some of the progress you've made with partners and business operators in Central California. I actually feel like priming some businesses down here to note that it's a possibility would make great headway in supporting some of those stewardship efforts. So that's a great thing to hear that there was an observed disturbance, and I really appreciate Cammie's efforts for volunteering for this case. We hope to see otters again, and hopefully engaging with businesses when we do in the future. So that's fantastic. Thanks for expanding on the Bold Explorer in San Diego earlier this year.
It's
I
like,
know we have some additional questions in the chat. Should we ask some of those?
sure.
So let's see. Someone had asked if you know about Otter 841 in Santa Cruz, noted for engaging with surfboards and surfers. And this person noted that 841 is safe and no one harmed her. Just a little bit more about you were noting recreation in one area, but not touching as much on surfing. So do you mind sharing about that situation?
So my answer to the question, do I know Otter 841 is, oh yeah. So there's no sea otter person in the state of California that doesn't know about Otter 841. So it was pretty interesting. So last year, obviously, she got a lot of press. I was very, very vocal, including with the press, about my belief that the viral nature of the coverage was not helping her and was not helping the situation, and was actually drawing people out to this location to try to see and photograph her. So we were kind of, and we meaning sort of a collective group of folks that are really working together on sea otter conservation and research in California, were kind of nervous when she showed up again. And this is like a cyclical thing that's related to her hormones, her pupping. We kind of know how hormones can kind of affect behavior across multiple species. And so that was probably a very strong contributor. Also, her lack of wariness of humans didn't help
Mm.
for sure. And she may have been fed by humans, which may have contributed to that. But this year, she had a couple interactions and it really calmed down. And that does seem to be kind of a pattern with these females that get a little bit aggro, if you will, just before when they're pregnant. And as they age, they sort of mature out of that a little bit. It's not always the case, but we were kind of hoping that for 841. And so this summer was really pretty calm. She may have lost her flipper tag. She hasn't been spotted in a while. People go out weekly to look for her. The flipper tags can be chewed off. Her radio doesn't work anymore. And she's also known for like making long trips all the way up to Año Nuevo.
Mm.
So we don't really know what her status is right now, but she could definitely come back into the Santa Cruz area and show up with a pup again. So that wouldn't be terribly surprising to anyone. So we just hope the community there has really come together for the most part to really be stewards to her. And it's another inspiring story of really the community taking on the care of an animal, and that's very, very dear and important to them. And I love seeing that. We've done a whole project on the relationship between surfers and sea otters. I don't have time to talk about that here, but I think there actually is a video on our YouTube channel of a young lady named Dakota who did a project last year and gave a talk about it. So
Yeah.
take a look for that.
I've heard Dakota speak on this study and think it's fascinating. And I think too, you touch on stewardship dispositions of outdoor recreationists and surfers in particular. And I think that's fascinating. You also mentioned at one point in your talk about individual animals. And I think in some cases, like 841, perhaps the highly visible individuals can actually in some ways bring light to issues that are affecting the entire population. And in some cases be an ambassador for that. So really interesting to consider this as a particular case. Thanks for expanding on it. We also have a note from Josie who wondered about protections for northern otters in the Washington State area. So a bit more about that, the understanding of other sea otter populations, maybe also with the filter of potential for range expansion, like you were talking about with San Diego. Can you expand a bit on the Washington area otters?
So I'm gonna tread carefully because I'm not an expert on Washington. They let off float down the coast yesterday, so that's another thing. Sorry, I keep throwing people to our YouTube page, but you can
Oh, it's great.
to them talk about Washington sea otters. They're the very first stop that float down the coast from yesterday. So that population is a product of a reintroduction, and they have done fairly well, but they are still like way up in the northern, almost the Olympic Peninsula area in Washington. And so there's still that huge gap. They haven't extended down into Oregon. So the next closest population is all the way down in at Año Nuevo in California. And so prior to the fur trade, as you saw in my map, that was a continuous population. There was still some genetic distinction between southern sea otters and northern sea otters, even though they were blending together and there was plenty of gene flow. We heard Annabelle talk about that last year, her talk about genetics last year and gene flow. But so it will be optimal someday if southern sea otters move northward and the northern sea otters that are in Washington state move southward and those two populations merge. And it may be that they might need a little bit of help along the way doing that because of some blockades to their range expansion that may not have occurred for them previously. So we'll see. I will say, I think she asked about protections. If they're within US waters, they're protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Not all sea otter populations are listed under the Endangered Species Act. Sea otters are very local, and so what happens locally and what impacts a population locally is really relevant. And so southern sea otters are listed, Southeast Alaska, or sorry, not Southeast Alaska, the Aleutian Islands are listed, but I'm not sure about the status of other populations. This might be the only two, but they're all protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act as long as that law continues.
Really helpful to know. And thanks for referring to the float down the coast. I don't want to misspeak, but I think all of the Sea Otter Awareness Week virtual events could be accessed on YouTube after the fact. And so we can go and look at the session that you just referenced as well as others. So this next question gets at another group interested in potential reintroduction, or excuse me, not reintroduction, interested in repopulating sea otters to the north coast. The question is, are you in touch with Noyo Center for Marine Science in Mendocino County, who are interested in repopulating sea otters? Any notes on that?
So I love this question. I wish Heather, who is my science communication director, and I know she's watching, but she can't speak, but I got to get it right for Heather. So this is a really great question, and this is one of the most exciting and cool parts about our program, our We Were Here program, our Sea Otter Recovery Community Engagement or SOURCE program, is that this is a community effort. Again, I keep using that word community, but that is really where the strength and the wisdom and the success of any kind of reintroduction lies. It's in working with everyone, all the different ways that you can define a community. And so definitely Heather really spearheads that program in Northern California. And check out our We Were Here page on our website to get a little bit more information. But Noyo Center is definitely one of the partners she works with. Many of the Northern California tribes are a big part of that. Science organizations, academics, agencies are all working together to try to learn from past reintroductions that have been successful but may have come at a cost, especially to some of those individuals that I'm really wanting people to remember. So this community really wants to get together and do it right for sea otters and right for all of the communities. And it's really in the very, very earliest stages of happening. And I think it's worth taking our time. In ecological terms, human timescales are pretty small. And so I think it's better that we take it slowly and do a really good job this time out.
That's really, thoughtful and it makes a lot of sense. And I do want to mention that I think that there's an upcoming event with this group. Is that correct? On Friday, a Sea Otter awareness event?
Um,
Let's check the schedule, but I think
can,
I want,
can you pop that into chat? So we had Noyo Center on Friday. Yes.
yeah. I'm also channeling Heather.
Yeah. 12 o'clock on Friday. And yeah, the Sea Otter Awareness Week Defenders of Wildlife page has all of these. I don't know if that's popped into the chat yet, but it has all of the events listed as they're happening, and they're just amazing. There's so many great events going on. I really encourage people to partake.
Well, I am also planning on and learning from that event on Friday. So thank you for that additional question. I think there's one other that asks about how um, otters hold sea urchins based on body shape. Since they're so pointy, can you speak a little bit about foraging behaviors?
Oh my gosh! So you're just speaking to you're singing my song. So a lot of what I did for 13 years was day in and day out from morning until evening watch sea otters eat. And it's people don't realize this, but when you hear facts about their diet, that is based on hours and hours and hours of humans actually watching them. And what's cool is sea otters are unique among marine mammals in that they dive to the bottom and then they bring their food up and use their belly as a table. And so we can actually see it, we can identify it, we can count how many, we can estimate how big they are based on the average width of a sea otter paw. And so I have seen sea otters eat thousands of urchins. And I'll just say two things. So the first is, remember what I said about individuals. Individual sea otters will have different styles of eating food. And I saw one otter that would crack the urchin underwater. So she would just come up and she just had the orange blob, and I had to figure out what was going on with that. I've had otters that roll an urchin like this between their paws to flatten down some urchins. They often bite where the spines are the shortest, the mouth of the urchin, the Aristotle's lantern. You might find urchins on the beach where sea otters live that have that whole bottom part just eaten out, and that's probably a sea otter artifact. So they have ways of dealing with those spines, but you know what? They get them stuck in their teeth. They can get tooth infections. Like, it's still rough, the things that they have to deal with their teeth. But yeah, they have had to be pretty clever at how to get at that. That's the most per gram of edible biomass. Urchins and all the other echinoderms, sand dollars, sea stars are the most nutrient rich of all the prey that they can eat.
Wow. There's another follow-up behavior question that someone else had that potentially also pertains to energy expenditure or conservation, I guess I could say. Someone wanted to know about sea otters holding hands. If they do, and if they do, can you share a little bit about some of the reasoning for that?
So I usually open the answer to this question with the statement, we don't, in biology, we try to avoid the terms never and always. So sea otters in captivity fairly regularly have been observed clasping paws. And that is behavior that may or may not have been encouraged by keepers in husbandry. But sea otters in the wild have very rarely, almost vanishingly small, been observed doing that. And I did a calculation. So we have a article, a story on our website about me doing the calculation of the number of times I've observed sea otters over the years and how many times I've seen them hold paws. And I think it was like 1/100th of a percent. I know it was very, very small, 1/1000th of a percent or something like that. We also did a poll of researchers at the Seattle Sea Otter Conservation Workshop last year, and the numbers were extremely low. They may have been nil for the number of researchers that had actually observed this behavior in the wild. So what's the point? They do it in captivity. It's an adorable behavior, and people love it. But when it comes to making your list of cool things that sea otters do, That's not even in my top 50.
Do you have a top one, or what's something that's in your top then?
So the sea otters as individuals is usually what I say. That they have such unique personalities is usually the thing that I give as my top answer, because people don't tend to think about other animals as having unique personalities and being different from one another. One of my other favorite things is a female's ability to avoid males. And so I've seen some pretty crazy stuff where a female who's an estrus has climbed on a rock just to have the male sort of circling around the rock, wondering where she went. Like they're pretty clever at being able to avoid males that they don't want to necessarily be courted by. And that really applies to a lot of their behaviors, all their ways of processing the different foods that they eat. They're just very, very clever animals and don't get enough credit for that.
Hmm.
That's the other C word, clever
Hmm.
versus cute. I would rather have there be a movement of people saying, sea otters are so clever.
I'll do my best to substitute.
That,
It may be a tough habit to break, but that's something that I could do for this collective effort. So your many hours of observations do have produced an incredible body of work in understanding sea otters, energy needs and expenditures, and I just really admire how Sea Otter Savvy has translated that into campaigns to shift positive behaviors around stewardship of sea otters. So I do really want to call that out and highlight that. I think it's an incredible example of how, when people ask, what can I do for an animal, a species, a place, an ecosystem? Sea Otter Savvy does such a good job of sharing concrete steps that people can contribute. So I do want to thank you for that. I also do have a follow-up question there on some of the stewardship certifications. So you've translated so much of the research produced into these guidelines for these operators, and you highlighted the stewardship certification. Can you just expand a bit on what some of the requirements of that would be and how those participating businesses would have been evaluated? I think that's an important aspect as well.
yes. Thank you for asking that question, because our Community Active Wildlife Stewards is our program that I am the most proud of, and it's been really the hardest to get going. And we based our model on a NOAA program called Dolphin Smart,
Hmm.
and it's a program that basically it does the same thing pretty much that we do, where they evaluate business practices and then apply certification recognition. So one of the challenges that a NOAA program has is that there are prohibitions in government organizations with promoting businesses, and Sea Otter Savvy as a nonprofit has no such prohibition. And so we happily and joyfully promote these businesses every chance we get. And so we borrowed their framework for evaluating and really adapted it to our program. And people can actually view this framework. So if they go to that cause page on our website, they can scroll down and you can see the full framework, which we always refer to as our draft, because we incorporate feedback from the participants, from the businesses that we're working with, to continue to adapt and improve that to make it work better for wildlife and better for businesses. And so they're different tiers that have different requirements, but we look at things like their orientation. So if they're just sending renters out on the water without a guide, how good are they at transmitting useful information in a short amount of time that they have before they're just sending people on the water, and then they have to kind of trust what they're going to do at that point. And that is one of our biggest challenges, because that is hard. Like
Hmm.
I really have a lot of empathies for these business owners and their staff, because you just have a few minutes to try to get people to change their behavior, as we mentioned earlier, and that is really challenging. So we're continually working together, and the great thing is these businesses that would be competitors are helping each other come up with language that's effective, and that's just super inspiring to me. Some of the other things we look at is advertising. Are you promoting? This is my least favorite phrase when it comes to wildlife, the up close and personal experience, in the photography, on your social media, on your website. So we're definitely looking at that. We have secret shoppers. So if any of you folks watching are in the Central Coast area, we have a secret shopper program. You can find that again on our website. And we actually will reimburse your fee, and you go out, evaluate mainly their orientation, and then go on a kayak trip, and then come back. We'll reimburse you for your trip. So that's one way that we have of evaluating how good they're doing. And yeah, so it's a pretty lengthy list of things that they have to meet. They do an amazing job. I love working with them, and then we really try to put them front and center for what they are actually, compromising their business in a way, because they're spending more time. Their staff is spending more time. They're putting effort and energy into making their stewardship at a higher level, to preserve sea otters, not because I'm telling them to, but because they recognize the importance of it. And so I just absolutely love working with these businesses. And there's no reason in the world why this can't happen in areas where sea otters currently aren't living yet, because it applies to wildlife in general. So we would be happy to talk with anyone who's interested about looking at this for Southern California or even Northern California. We really want to incorporate that into our expand into those areas where otters might return someday.
Such important points. And for those that have joined this talk tonight, or those that maybe are watching it afterwards, looking into tourism operators and providers to try to look for those wildlife certifications is a fantastic way to contribute to long-term conservation, along with industry partners, conservation organizations, and others. So thanks for that explanation. I think it's fascinating and really excellent work.
Thank you.
So I am so grateful for your time and sharing your expertise. I've enjoyed so much about this evening's session, along with the many other great events as part of Sea Otter Awareness Week. I want to thank everyone who's joined us tonight, as well as the organizers of Sea Otter Awareness Week, in addition to Sea Otter Savvy. That includes Defenders of Wildlife, Monterey Bay Aquarium, California, State Department of Wildlife. Jenna, am I missing anybody that I apologize if I have?
Blanca,
Lock Alliance.
Blanca Alliance. Yeah,
Yes.
it's California State Parks, Morro Bay State Parks, not Department of Wildlife. We'll get in trouble for saying that.
My apologies. I went off script. I'm sorry, Heather and others. But Jenna, thanks for correcting me. And worth everybody looking into the many events as part of Sea Otter Awareness Week. I really appreciate your time this evening and looking forward to learning more about sea otters moving forward.
Together we thrive. Thanks.
Thank you.